I thought I was done writing about William Manchester, but as his fellow U.S. Marine Gomer Pyle used to say, surprise, surprise, surprise. I'm not. I continued to read in a book of his essays that began with one entitled Controversy, the one that recorded his difficulties with the Kennedys over the publication of the book Death of a President. In short, he thought he was writing a history of a week in November 1963. They wanted a canonization. Manchester followed that piece with a series of histories of wars, the Spanish-American War, the Great War, and the War in the Pacific. As he was doing this, he realized that he was also writing about the death of war, so far, that is, as the individual soldier was concerned, due to the overwhelming advances in the development of weaponry, culminating in the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Prior to that, bad as war was, a soldier at least had a chance to affect the outcome, however slight it might be. There was a reason for training, strategy, and conduct on the battlefield. The big bombs eliminated that. The soldier's days were over, Manchester wrote. No longer, in his words, could a man with a rifle affect the outcome of a war. That, of course, is exactly the myth tapped into by Chris Kyle, who became a hero and a legend known as the American Sniper, a man with a rifle getting the job done, helping to win a war. Exactly what his country wanted and needed to hear. The outcome of that tale was that he was murdered by a crazed soldier on a shooting range in America, and the cities he fought in were quickly retaken by enemy forces. The Spanish-American War made a hero out of Teddy Roosevelt, to which he would have said bully, and it helped get him elected president. That war also pushed the United States into prominence as a world power, a global policeman, which elated the American people at first, making the world safe for democracy and all of that, but it proved to be a fatal role. The Great War, which became known as World War I, diminished from greatness to just one of a series, turned war into more of a slaughterhouse than ever before. Thousands of men would die each day fighting over inches of hard-won ground, which would be lost the next day, back and forth, the agony writhing over corpses. The war in the Pacific was also devastating in its ferocity and loss of life. In almost every battle, the enemy was prepared to fight to the death, so the nature of the combat was driven by a kind of madness. The author, Manchester, was a part of this history, badly wounded on Okinawa when he was hit in the back by shrapnel from a rocket mortar. It took 5 operations and 3 years for him to recover. When he was told that the war was over while lying in a hospital bed, he said, "Oh." Manchester was cited by his division commander for gallantry and action and extraordinary achievement. Your courage was a constant source of inspiration, and your conduct throughout was in keeping with the highest tradition of the United States Marine Service. Manchester followed his war summaries with an essay entitled Corps d'Elite, a brief history, reflection, and celebration of the United States Marine Corps. It is difficult to read it without feeling a deep thrill of pride in men so dedicated to service, exactly the way Chris Kyle felt about being a Navy SEAL. And while I was reading it, I wondered how this man, who was himself a leatherneck, could have been such fodder for all the privileged pony boys involved in the publication of that book about the death of John Kennedy. And the answer is that in the war he was a soldier and a Marine. When it came to the impasse over the book, he was a writer, and he wasn't a Kennedy. 2 enormous strikes against him. All people are vulnerable in some way, writers through their work. As Manchester wrote in a brief prologue to his essay, Controversy, a writer works in a ballpark all by himself. Sometimes he wonders if there's anybody watching in the seats. As he quickly learned, the Kennedy Project would be different. He was no longer working alone. He had plenty of help, the proverbial too many cooks. He also prefaced the essay with a quote from a speech given by John Kennedy shortly before he died. Kennedy said the highest duty of the writer is to remain true to himself and let the chips fall where they may. In serving his vision of the truth, the artist best serves his nation. Heeding those words, I think that Manchester may have discovered that there is not that much difference between the entrenched Japanese and the Kennedy family, between the call to duty for a Marine and the vocation of a writer. Semper Fi.